The sound of the ocean roared like thunder beneath the vast metal belly of the aircraft carrier USS Dominion. The wind tore across the deck, whipping through uniforms and flags, carrying the scent of oil, steel, and salt. The morning sun was sharp, glinting off fighter jets lined in perfect symmetry. Crew members moved with precision, their boots clanking on the steel floor, their voices echoing through the open air. It was another day in the heart of the ocean, another day in the life of the Navy's finest. But that morning, when a lone woman stepped off the transport helicopter and walked across the deck, all motion seemed to pause for just a second. Every head turned. Every whisper rose like smoke. Her uniform was crisp, her posture perfectly straight, and her eyes calm but cold, the kind of calm that made people uneasy. She wasn't wearing the insignia of high command. No one recognized her face. But there was something in her silence, something in her gait that carried a quiet defiance. They laughed when she walked onto the carrier, the sailors would later say, because no one thought she belonged there. Lieutenant Ava Morgan had spent her entire career in the shadow of disbelief. The Navy wasn't kind to anyone who broke its patterns, especially not a woman who had come from the inland farms of Nebraska, a place no one believed could breed a soldier, much less a pilot. The moment she arrived, whispers followed her like a shadow. Another charity recruit. Probably some PR stunt. She'll wash out in a week. But Ava had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than words. Her orders were clear. She was to lead flight training for the carrier's youngest fighter squadron. The Dominion was one of the Navy's most prestigious vessels, and its flight deck was sacred ground for the most elite pilots alive. No one could understand why the Navy had assigned a woman with no known combat record to train them. The crew scoffed behind her back. Some smirked openly. Even the captain of the carrier, Commander Richard Cole, couldn't hide his skepticism when he saw her. He had seen hundreds of pilots, men and women who had bled for their wings. But this one? She looked too young, too composed, too out of place. He watched her from the command bridge as she inspected the jets, her expression unreadable. She better know what she's doing, he muttered to his first officer. What no one knew, not the captain, not the crew, was that Ava Morgan had been trained by the most legendary pilot in naval history, Admiral Jack Morgan, her father. Jack Morgan's name was still whispered with reverence in every hangar, every training academy, every airbase in the fleet. He was the man who had redefined aerial warfare, the one who had led the Iron Hawks during the Crimson Gulf conflict and flown missions no one else dared. He was a ghost now, long retired after a crash that had nearly killed him. The Navy hadn't seen him in years. Most of the younger recruits didn't even believe he was alive. But Ava had been trained under his brutal discipline, not in classrooms or simulators, but in the raw, merciless skies above the Nevada deserts. Her training wasn't about flying. It was about surviving, about mastering fear until fear itself bowed down. In her first few days on the Dominion, Ava didn't say much. She listened. She observed. She watched the squadron pilots joke, argue, and compete, testing her patience with subtle disrespect. They called her ma'am with sarcastic smiles. They laughed when she reviewed their flight recordings and pointed out errors they thought no one could see. But she said nothing. Instead, she requested flight time, a live demonstration. The crew gathered around the deck as the jets were prepped. The captain stood with folded arms, curious but doubtful. Ava strapped herself into the cockpit of a Hornet, the same model her father had once flown. When the engines ignited, the roar felt like a challenge thrown to the heavens, and then she flew. What happened in the next 15 minutes would be talked about on that carrier for years. She tore through the sky with a precision so sharp it felt unreal, executing rolls, dives, and inverted climbs with impossible grace. She maneuvered the Hornet in ways that defied textbook technique, weaving through invisible air currents like a dancer in a storm. When she pulled a 9G turn at supersonic speed and sliced through the horizon before landing smoothly on the deck, no one laughed anymore. The silence was thunderous. When she climbed down from the cockpit, her hair slightly undone from the helmet, she gave a quiet, almost amused smile. "That's how I was trained," she said simply. The captain stared at her, realization dawning. "Who trained you?" he asked. "Jack Morgan," she said softly. "My father." The deck fell silent again, and not from disbelief but from awe. The old legends of Admiral Morgan had shaped generations of pilots. Every man and woman on that carrier had studied his tactics, memorized his missions, quoted his words. And now his daughter stood before them, not just living up to his name, but embodying it. Over the following weeks, everything changed. The crew who once mocked her now followed her instructions with silent respect. Her training sessions were brutal. Early mornings, harsh critiques, and relentless drills. But beneath her stern exterior there was empathy. She knew what it was like to be underestimated. She pushed her pilots not to prove her worth, but to make them see their own. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, a storm rolled across the ocean. The sky turned black and the waves rose high against the carrier's steel walls. The squadron was grounded, all except one pilot, Lieutenant Harris, who had gone off course during a solo test flight before the storm hit. Communication was lost. Visibility dropped to zero. Panic rippled across the command bridge. Without hesitation, Ava requested clearance to launch. The captain tried to refuse, and it was suicide to fly in that weather. But she looked him straight in the eye and said, "If you were him, you'd let me go." He knew she meant her father. Slowly, silently, he nodded. The launch was violent. The storm tore at the wings, the lightning flashing like fire across the endless dark. Through the chaos, Ava's voice came calm over the radio, guiding Harris's weak signal, reading the winds, calculating every move in her head. The ocean below was merciless. One mistake, one hesitation, and both planes would vanish forever. But she didn't falter. She found him, terrified, half-blind, his oxygen running low, and guided him back through the storm, leading him home like a star through the black. When they landed, drenched in rain and trembling with exhaustion, the entire deck erupted in cheers. Even the captain saluted her, a long, respectful gesture that needed no words. That night she stood alone on the deck, the storm fading into silence. The stars broke through the clouds, shimmering over the endless horizon. Somewhere out there she knew her father was watching. And for the first time in her life, she felt not like she was walking in his shadow, but carrying his legacy forward. Weeks later, the USS Dominion completed its mission and returned to port. When Ava stepped off the carrier, no one laughed. The same sailors who once doubted her now stood in line to salute her. The captain himself walked her to the transport and said, "Your father would be proud. So is his Navy." She smiled, not proud, not triumphant, just deeply human. "He always said," she whispered, "the sky isn't just for those who dare. It's for those who refuse to quit." And with that, she walked away, the woman they once laughed at. Now the pilot they would never forget. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more true, inspiring stories to life. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what moment in Ava's journey moved you the most?